YouTube. Right, and I guess I will let people in. Good evening, everyone. If you're just joining, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. Just letting in people through the doors. It's going to take a few minutes, but welcome everybody. If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, and hello to everybody. We're just getting started, letting people in the door. Takes a few minutes. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall, and we're expecting the county executive in a few minutes. We'll give it another couple minutes and then we'll start talking with this renter town hall. We are waiting for the county executive who'll be joining us soon. And I'll wait for my magic number and then we'll start talking. All right, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Losack. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. And with me is our staff. So far, we're waiting for the county executive who will join us in a few minutes. With me is our outreach director, David Mullins, our outreach coordinator, Emily Towie, our outreach coordinator, Melek Demir, and Pat Beckham, and our Governor Westmore Service Year intern, Max Wilberg. And another of our interns, Brian Piot from the same program, will also be joining us in a few minutes. And of course, we're waiting for the county executive. In the meantime, we had one spectacular building community celebration just a week ago, and we received an incredible proclamation of appreciation from the county council, saluting us for more than 15 years of service to the renter community. That was a surprise to us and a welcome honor, and we're very proud of that. We have been working in apartment communities across the county and frankly in other parts of the state We're the first and only regional nonprofit dedicated exclusively to renter outreach, education, organizing, and advocacy. And we weren't always appreciated by some of our elected officials. And so having that proclamation by the new council president, Kate Stewart, and the vice president, Will Jawando, was really quite an honor for us. But I think we ought to talk about some of the fun we had at the party. Emily, you were there. What do you think?
It was a great party. We had a lot of our renters come out, and actually see some of them in our attendees tonight. So thank you guys who came. Um, we had we had a lot going on. We had a jazz band from Blake High School, their jazz combo band, and we also had a singer this year, and they did a great job. Um, we had we had a lot of people in attendance. We had several of our tenant association leaders, just friends we've made along the way, allies, along with a lot of elected officials. Um, we also, I guess we want to shout out a couple of the food and drinks that we had. We had wings from Allset, which I heard people thought were very good. So Allset is in Silver Spring. I'll give them a little shout out. And then the beer and wine were from David Trone's Total Wine and More. So if you like the beer, you can go to Total Wine and More. Um, so give those two little plugs. We appreciate their support. And I wasn't able to eat the wings, but people said they were delicious, so I'll take their word. Um, and I heard from different of my tenant leaders that it was nice for them to get to meet people who live in other apartments. A lot of times, certain renters, like, they don't necessarily engage with other apartment buildings. They don't have the opportunity to do so. So I heard a lot of positive feedback from tenants that it was nice to mingle with tenants at other buildings and to kind of hear what their association is like, maybe what their management's like over there, and just get to swap stories and build communities. So we'll have it again next year, and hope for those who couldn't make it, hope they can come by next year. Um, and yeah, we were very, very glad to be honored and very glad to be able to honor our renters and the elected officials who have supported the renters movement. So we're not done yet.
That's terrific, Emily. Yeah, I think it really was a major success this time, as it is every year. We've had it at different parts of the county, but we've been managing to do it at downtown Silver Spring, and the venue was terrific. I really have to give kudos to the Blake High School Jazz Combo. They were absolutely terrific, and we were glad to have them. Um, and I think you can't underscore how important it is for these tenant leaders to be recognized, from one to another, because the battles that they have in their own communities are often significant, and being able to, um, meet other tenant leaders, understand that they're not the only ones who are going through the challenges that they're going through. It's important for them to feel mutually supported. Um, any other thoughts from folks who attended? Pat, you were there. You're on mute.
I thought it was
Yeah.
wonderful. I think it's always good when people have a common goal, can get together and talk. The atmosphere was beautiful. Everyone I spoke to had a good time. Um, I thought we had a good turnout considering how cold it was. So it was great, and hopefully next year we can double that number.
Yeah, although I don't know where we're going to put them. We were kind of crowded
We
to begin
were,
with.
yeah,
But the more the merrier, I always say.
yeah,
Uh,
it was a
and
wonderful event.
And we had some other people who came too. We had the office of Senator Van Hollen was there, and Jamie Raskin, our congressman, was there. Isola Shaw, the leading renter champion on the Rockville City Council, was there. Lorig Charkoudian, one of our state delegates, was there. Vaughn Stewart, a state delegate who is also on our board of directors, was there, as well as the other members of our board of directors were there too. So we really had a terrific time mingling and networking and just enjoying the music and fellowship. And as Emily says building community. Let me talk about a couple of things. Coming down the road, the most important piece of renter legislation that the state has ever seen is on the hopper for this Maryland General Assembly, which begins the middle of January 8th, I think, is if I've got my dates right. And that's the just cause or / good cause eviction bill. And everybody who's on this webinar needs to pay close attention to that. Last year, we got as far as that legislation has ever gotten. We got a 96-37 vote in the Maryland General Assembly in the House of Delegates. It got through its committee, then got to the House of Delegates for the first time in state history, and then got over to the Senate, unfortunately, where it stalled. The long hand and powerful hand of the landlord developer industry still persuades the senators not to regulate the industry, but we think it's critical. Just cause eviction protection means simply that your lease would automatically renew each year with whatever appropriate reasonable rent increase, absent a justifiable reason not to renew it. Right now, with just 60 days notice in the state of Maryland, a landlord could say at the end of your lease with 60 days that they're not going to renew. And if you stay 1 day longer than the lease term, you're what's known as tenant holding over. And then the landlord can file for eviction to have you evicted for tenant holding over. And there's little or no defense against it. And because landlords have this power, the abuse of tenants for seeking promised or required services and maintenance, for forming tenants associations, for building community and collective action to deal with issues in the building, the abuse and the ability to retaliate is very powerful and has an incredibly chilling effect on whole renter communities. And we are seeing it. We're seeing it here in Montgomery County. We're seeing it in other parts of the state. More and more landlords are using the tenant holding over eviction process to circumvent legitimate eviction processes, such as breach of lease. If a tenant is alleged to be breaking the rules in an apartment community, the landlord can take that tenant to court and accuse them of doing something that is evictable. But they have to prove it. They have to say what it is, and they have to show evidence. In the tenant holding over process, the only thing that they have to tell a landlord is that they gave them 60 days notice. They don't have to give any other reason. Even if the tenant is certain that the reason was because of the color of their skin, because of their income source, because they were, again, pursuing their rights in some way. Even if you know that, if you don't have the evidence, the smoking gun, the email, witnesses, which are very difficult when the landlord holds all the cards like that, you really don't have any defense in court. And so people are being evicted this way more and more in the state of Maryland, which, by the way, Maryland is the #1 eviction filing state in the nation. And right now we are seeing across the state of Maryland, as is other parts of the United States, an eviction crisis, where housing is increasingly unstable, rental housing in particular, where people are being priced out, where people are unable to live in quality environments. So this is a real problem. And we think that just cause eviction protection is especially important to protect tenants and to stabilize communities. The bill itself, which is the lead sponsor, is Delegate Janelle Wilkins, a former board member of the Renters Alliance. And what it will do is authorize local municipalities to pass just cause in whatever form they choose, or not pass it. So right now, because just cause is eviction law, it's under state law. So it requires the state legislature to either pass it or to enable the local communities to pass it if they so choose. So that's what this legislation would do. I do know that thanks to the majority of the county council, thanks to our county executive, that they are supporters of this legislation if they are enabled to pass it locally. I know that our county delegation of state legislators are also in vast majority in support of this legislation. So, and we've also, of course, heard from Prince George's County in Baltimore, the Maryland Association of Counties, the NAACP, our labor partners, all in support of this. So raises a big question mark as to why did it get stalled in the Senate? So we're hoping that all of you will call your state senators and every other state senator and say, hey, look, it's time for this. This is the renters' rights equivalent of the Civil Rights Act, that no renter should be evicted from their homes without a good reason. Housing instability has major consequences for communities. It affects our health, our welfare, our overall prosperity. It impacts student achievement. When kids have to move from school to school, their ability to achieve academically is impacted. It impacts crime rates when people are anxious and unstable, and it increases homelessness, which we are also seeing increase in Montgomery County, one of the wealthiest counties in the United States. And so you can only imagine what's taking place in the not so wealthy parts of this country where tenants are being impacted by a lack of protection. So it's been quite a struggle to get this far, and we're hoping again that we can get the Maryland Senate to act. Even if they don't like it, then just give the local municipalities the choice to enact it. If you don't want to have it in St. Mary's, then at least give Montgomery County the opportunity to enact it. So we're hoping that common sense will be part of our politics this year. But if anybody pays close attention to politics, that might be too much to ask for, but we'll see. We're going to do what we can. There might be some other legislation coming down the pike. David or Emily, anybody know of what else we should draw some attention to?
I was not legislation, but I was gonna say I did just put a link in the chat that goes over notice requirements until we have just cause. If you want to know if the non-renewal you received, is legal and proper and they followed all the rules, I would check out that link. That's from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and it goes over the notice requirements from landlords for all the different kinds of things, for a non-renewal, for a rent increase, for failure to pay rent. So I'd recommend people check that out. But I see our special guest has arrived.
He has arrived, and I see he got the memo because I've been acting as his security double, just in case. So I've done the best I can, Mr. County Executive.
It's okay. My life does not run by a clock because nobody else I have to deal with runs by a clock.
We actually believe that you're a very busy individual. So we're glad to see you, and we welcome you. Let me just do a little bit of an intro here and a reminder to the people who are joining us this evening. If you have any questions or concerns, please put them in the chat. Don't do the raise hand thing. Don't put it in the Q&A. Put it in the chat. Our staff will be monitoring that for the county executive's benefit. Let me also quickly introduce our panel again. We have our outreach director, David Mullins, our outreach coordinator, Emily Towie, our outreach staff, Melek Demir and Pat Beckham, and we have our two service year interns with us also from the Governor Westmore's service year, Max Wilberg and Brian Piot. So the county executive is going to go through a number of his remarks on the attainable housing plan, as well as his own perspective on housing challenges in Montgomery County, and a little bit of history if he likes. But everybody should know that Mark Elrich and the Renters Alliance go back to the beginning. Mark was on the renters' rights trajectory before we came into being. He was with the Tacoma Park County Council and was responsible for establishing rent stabilization in that municipality. When he ran for county council early on, about, I guess, 2007, around that time, he and I met on a park bench in front of the YMCA, and I said to him, hey, look, we've got these problems with renters. And Mark said, here's what you do. Create a petition And we'll give it to Ike Leggett, and 4 things on that petition: rent stabilization, just cause eviction protection, an end to month-to-month lease fees, and the establishment of a task force to look into renter issues, the first of its kind. We did that in short order. We got over 1,000 names, submitted it to County Executive Ike Leggett at that time, and then Mark took the leadership in going to Ike Leggett to establish the first tenants work group. That tenants work group, which Mark sat on, along with the office of Jamie Raskin, the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, renters, CASA, a number of organizations, including the Landlords Association, even though this was a specifically renter-interested work group. We made 50 recommendations, and one of those recommendations, which we could act on immediately, the others took years with Mark's championship, was the formation of the Renters Alliance. So we owe a lot to County Executive Mark Elrich for helping create us and for being a leader in the renters' rights movement. So, Mark, I know there's more that we could applaud in your history, but I think that's a start. We'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try to say, I want to share this PowerPoint, and I appreciate Ryan's question. I'm not aligned with Donald Trump. You're aligned with the Koch brothers, and that is the fundamental problem. I'll give you a little lesson in Montgomery County history. Black population in Montgomery County was 30% of Montgomery County in 1870. It dropped to 3% of Montgomery County by 1960. And it dropped to 3% because Montgomery County had covenants. Montgomery County was not an urban area. It was almost totally farmland. In fact, it pretty much was totally farmland. And there were no urban areas. That's why there's no historic urban poverty in Montgomery County, because there were no cities in Montgomery County. The one city in Montgomery County was Rockville, which you could probably spit and go from one end of Rockville to the other. It was not anything in the way of a city. And that was the nature of Montgomery County. Like I said, in 1960, the population of Black people had dropped from 30% to 3%. People were kept out of housing in Montgomery County because of racial covenants, not because of single-family zones. Every square inch of this place was covered with racial covenants. All of them included Black people. Most of them was Blacks and Jews who could not buy or rent housing in Montgomery County. And in a few cases, it was Catholics were thrown into the mix for good measure. But it was primarily Blacks and Jews who were banned from owning property in Montgomery County. That's why the county was segregated. Between 1960 and 1970, fair housing laws were passed in Montgomery County. The the covenants on the property that prohibited selling to Black and Jews were ruled to be unenforceable and illegal. And the county began enforcing fair housing, which was going out when property was either for sale or rent, and making sure that anybody could buy or rent the place in Montgomery County. In that decade began the first increase of the Black population in Montgomery County, and it's continued ever since then. And the problems that we had were basically caused by flat out racism. They didn't need single family homes here to keep people out of the neighborhoods. They simply used the exclusionary zones, the exclusionary and not zoning, but the covenants on the property. So that's the history of what happens in Montgomery County. And the biggest problem is in most of this county, most of it's integrated. Where the integration doesn't occur, it's not integrated by income. So you have parts of the county where you've got very high incomes, and that housing was reserved for people of higher incomes. It was reserved for higher incomes when my family moved to Montgomery County. My father was a postal clerk. He looked at, and we eventually bought a new house off of Forest Glen Road. The house cost $20,000 a year, $20,000, and his mortgage payment was $134 a year. Working people could move into a place like that. Bethesda, my father went to look at a house in Bethesda. The house in Bethesda was $45,000 a year, and a postal clerk couldn't afford it. But other government workers who are higher up in the government could afford $45,000. So most of the segregation in Montgomery County has been done by income. And if you look at where people live today, you see people living all over Montgomery County. One of my favorite things I like hearing from people is single family zoning. If you like that, then that's meant to keep minorities out of the county. If that were the case, it's hard to explain how this county is now 56% minority and 44% white, when it was 95% white in 1970, 4.5% black, and 0.5% everything else. So there's a little bit of mythology going around about what happened here. But single family zones were the problems, and the black families that moved here wanted single family houses like everybody else wanted single family houses. They wanted yards, they wanted bedrooms, they wanted space. They were moving out of the more overcrowded housing in DC and trying to live where you're trying to live a family in an apartment. That's not what they were looking for. They were looking for the same thing everybody else wanted, and eventually they were able to get it. So I want to talk about what's in the Park and Planning's attainable housing. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint. I think I
Great,
hit the
and I
thing
did
that
make
says
you a
share.
co-host, County Executive Elrich. I do think it is a bit of a punchline to somehow suggest that you're aligned with Donald Trump. Now, that would be interesting.
Yeah, it's a joke. But I want to show you what, folks like, this guy are aligned with. So we'll talk about what Park and Planning is up to. What do I do? Screen. Which screen do I find? Bear with me, this one here. I'm like not an expert at PowerPoint, so it doesn't always behave the way I want. So first of all, thank you all for supporting rent stabilization. Probably the most important legislation we ever got passed in the county. I actually brought it up when I was first on the council. I did 2 different drafts of it. I could not even get a single council member to walk in my office and talk about the drafts or have any discussion whatsoever about rent stabilization. So that's what we started with in Montgomery County. With this new council and with leadership of, people like Will Joando and Kristen Mink in particular, we were able to get rent stabilization. It's not the best bill. The Tacoma Parks bill was better. It limited rent increases to less than inflation. Now this bill limits it to about 6%, but that's not the minimum. It could go higher than that. Anyway, I think that was one of the most important things we did. So Park and Planning's out there, and they're touting something called the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative. And I want to tell you why I think this is important and what they're planning on doing. This did not start out as attainable housing. This is supposed to be affordable housing. And Park and Planning did 2 studies. They looked at East Silver Spring and they said, what happens to the housing in East Silver Spring if you build duplexes or triplexes where there's now a single family house? And the study came back and it said that the new units would be as expensive or more expensive than the existing units. And that made sense. And, we were able to confirm it with when we talked to real estate agents that if you could put 2 houses on a lot, you were going to sell both houses at the price of the houses in the neighborhood. Nobody was going to buy a house for $800,000 and build a $400,000 unit. If they buy a house for $800,000, the units they built were going to be $800,000 or more. And that's what Park and Planning was told. It's about the same time they did a study of White Flint, and they wanted to know why the developers weren't building in White Flint. And what the developers said was, we're not building because the rents aren't high enough. Grasp that, folks. They were zoned for all kinds of housing. They could have built, there are 31,000 housing units right now that have been approved that aren't being built. And they're not being built because the rents aren't high enough. This tells you who they plan on serving and who they don't want to serve. If you look at what Park and Planning did in Bethesda, they zoned the whole place for high rise. The units are extraordinarily expensive, and there's no requirement to build 3 and 4 bedroom units. So why is that important? Because that means no minority families will be moving to Bethesda if there are no affordable units that have multiple bedrooms. So Park and Planning could care less about affordability, and it could care less about integration. They've zoned Bethesda to remain fairly segregated, and I look at high-rise housing as actually the true form of modern segregation. The price of the housing is so expensive and the land prices are so high that you can't build affordable housing if you're going up into a high-rise building. So park and planning is pretty much ensured that Bethesda will not be integrated and there will not be a lot of families there. Like I said, attainable housing allows duplexes, triplexes, and quads into single-family neighborhoods. It also allows small apartment buildings, and this is a pop quiz, but the apartment buildings have to have 19 units or less. Does anybody know why they have to be 19 units or less? No? They have to be 19 units or less because 19 is the magic number in Montgomery County. If you build 20 units or more, you have to provide MPDUs, affordable housing units. If you only build 19, there's no affordable housing unit requirement. So you think about what they're up to doing, which is to move more expensive housing into neighborhoods and to make whatever apartments there that are available affordable to people who are not lower income people. So this is not about providing opportunities for you all. This is about limiting opportunities for you all. Where do I go next? Where's the one with the slide with park and planning answering? It's not about affordable housing. It's not 2, 3, which one? Oh, this one. I'm going to jump to this. So park and planning has a page. You can see this is park and planning. This is their attainable housing strategies page. And they asked this question. I can't believe they did this. They said, is this affordable housing? Their answer, no. The prices of the newly built homes will be determined by the market. Can you guys live in market price housing? No. So they even answered the question this way. I mean, if I was going to try to sneak something over on somebody, I would not ask myself this question and then answer it like this. So they have actually no shame about what they're doing. They're telling you they have no intention of building. So for all this pressure to put stuff in single family neighborhoods, none of it's going to be affordable. This is not about you. And the thing that worries me, if you know anything about Montgomery County planning, we have all these activity centers in the county, and the county is actually zoned for more housing than we're projected to need through 2050. So we are already zoned for the people that are projected to come here. So if park and planning or a council member says, these many people are coming here, we have to have housing, the county's already zoned for it. The county has 31,000 units, like I said, that could build tomorrow if somebody pulled the building permit. They're all the way through the approval process. They're not being built. So we've got the capacity to build. We don't have landlords, or we don't have builders who are willing to build affordable units for people. I just had an incident with the developer in Pike and Rose, and he had approval to build 3 high-rise towers. And he came to me and he said, you know, I can't build the 3 high-rise towers. There's no market for 3 high-rises because you need a lot of wealthy people to fill 3 high-rises. So he wanted to partner with us, and he was going to build 1,000 units, and the county was going to be able to buy half of them for affordable. We never get deals like that from a developer. This guy got tired of me complaining about them, and he said, I'll come and work with you, and you guys can get half the units. And park and planning initially told him they would not approve it if he didn't build the high rises. So if he built the high rises with no affordability except for the 15% moderately priced dwelling units, which don't serve people below 50% of area median income, they would let him build that building. But if he wanted to build buildings where there would be massive affordability, park and planning was going to oppose it. So I started talking about what park and planning was doing publicly, and a month later they reversed themselves and said, this is a great idea, and we're really happy you're doing it. I'm thrilled that they got happy about him doing it, but it shouldn't have been a battle. It should have been something that they were willing to do right away. Meanwhile, back at the slides. So the attainable housing rezones 82% of the single family homes in Montgomery County. They'd be able to do duplexes, triplexes, and quads by right. And I talked about the apartments, and it's a real problem because if the projected future population is drawn off into the suburbs again, and the incomes are drawn off into the suburbs, the incomes that are left to occupy the activity centers, or even the places like downtown Silver Spring or downtown Glenmont and stuff like that, is only going to be the lower income portion of the population. So what you wind up doing is continuing or deepening the segregation in Montgomery County. Single family neighborhoods will get whiter, and the areas that aren't single family and apartment will get less, will not be whiter. They'll be predominantly minority, and the housing there will be targeted toward lower income people, and the single family homes will be targeted to upper county people. So if you wanted to increase the segregation in Montgomery County, you would do exactly what Parkland Planning is planning to do. And as you know, I think it's pretty clear, it should be pretty clear by this point, they're not interested in affordability. The Affordable Housing Initiative has nothing to do with affordability. So if you're hoping that the thought of just getting new buildings is going to get affordable units, it's not true. Now they'll argue that if you build new stuff, people will move out of the old stuff and the rents will go down. There's something else that happens when the rents go down. The quality of the apartments goes down. And you can see this in Montgomery County. All of the low-rise buildings, the red brick buildings that you see around Montgomery County, particularly in Wheaton, Silver Spring, and Bethesda, they were designed back around in the mid-60s when they were built to be affordable for the working class. And the single-family neighborhoods outside of them were less affordable. They planned transit that would go through the centers, which is where the denser housing was, and where they weren't going to build transit around the perimeter is where the suburb was going to be around Silver Spring. It was around downtown Bethesda. You can still see in Bethesda, more of the red brick buildings survived in Bethesda than survived in Silver Spring. But they were all meant to house working people who could afford housing. They are an endangered species now, and they are still more affordable than most places. But in the older parts of the county, where they've really gone through a transition, like on the east side of the county, the quality of those buildings is nothing like the quality of those buildings used to be. When they started serving low-income people, they lowered the standards. And they can do this to low-income people because if you have limited income and there's a very small supply of affordable housing, you can't walk. If you've got a landlord who sucks, but you can only afford $1,500 a month, and you can't afford a $2,500 one bedroom in downtown Bethesda, you're stuck. And landlords know that. And when they know you're stuck and you're not going to walk out on them, they don't need to provide the services. And so they lower the rent so that you'll rent there, and they know that middle class people won't rent there, but you also start to lose the services. And what's happened in Montgomery County is pretty much common, not just to Montgomery County, but to just generally around in the housing world. This is the path by which property gets cheaper. It doesn't get cheaper because a benevolent owner says, oh, gee, the only people who can rent are at 50% of area median income. The owners aren't benevolent, and they rent and they lower the services so that they don't have to worry about paying for the quality of a unit that they used to have to pay for. Parking Planning's plan and ignores a bunch of other stuff. They don't look at traffic at all. And so congestion is of no concern to them. Stormwater they ignored, and we're doing a countywide floodplain study because the storms have increased the amount of flooding in Montgomery County. The more you increase impervious surface, the more you increase flooding. And Parking Planning is planning on covering lots with housing and parking in the driveways, which will greatly increase the imperviousness. And they didn't feel any need to study that. They didn't feel any need to study flooding. The more you covered a lot with the building and with driveways, you lose the tree canopy. There's limited parking. There are neighborhoods, and I'm sure you guys have been in neighborhoods in Montgomery County where if you have cars parked on both sides of the street, car driving has to go through single file. And you pull into a space between parked cars and let the other car pass before you go forward. So they're not considering parking, they're not considering overcrowding in schools. And how you make a plan without planning for these things is beyond me. This is like planning 101, that you have to plan for a complete community and all the things a community needs. Our planning board does not feel they need to do that. The county has an adequate public facilities ordinance, which has been butchered by this council and previous councils. And the purpose of the adequate public facilities ordinance was to ensure that if you built a new neighborhood, you have to have transportation and you have to add school capacity, because they did not want roads that weren't functioning, and they wanted classrooms that could actually hold the number of students that the neighborhoods would bring to the county. And over the years, the council has changed the name of this policy and actually got rid of the tie to adequate public facilities. And that's a really bad thing in terms of quality of life for people. So what they do is they don't require the developers to pay for the infrastructure. And so the infrastructure either never gets built or the bills get passed on to single family homeowners. But the people who are doing the development and property and profiting from it pay less and less. And that's been a problem in the county for a while, and it continues to be a problem. There is no equity in this. I don't know how familiar you are with numbers in Montgomery County, but Black and Latino households have an average income that's half of white and Asian households, and that would put them in the mid 70,000s. So with $70,000, you can afford $21,000 a year for rent, which works out to something like $1,700. And $1,700 doesn't get you very much in Montgomery County. And if you're a family, it's very unlikely to get a 3-bedroom apartment for $1,700. You're sure not renting a rental home for $1,700. So this is going to keep Black and Latino households out of most neighborhoods and most downtowns in Montgomery County. There was an East County listening concern. Many of the residents there are from the Black community, and they're very upset and concerned about what this is going to mean for their neighborhoods, because they don't want to be priced out of their neighborhoods. And single family homes that are rentals are likely targets. I think nationally, something like 25% of these single family homes that are rented or have been bought up by syndicates. We don't have a number on that yet in Montgomery County, but we're expecting that's going to happen here. And what landlords are going to do is they're going to go into these neighborhoods and they're going to offer people a lot of money for their houses so they can tear them down and build the duplex or triplex and get the higher rents for those units. Like I said, this isn't going to be good for anybody. Be good for the person who sells the house, but it's not a recipe for providing the housing that you need in Montgomery County. So who's driving this? There are a couple of people driving it. One is Montgomery County doesn't have massive greenfields anymore, except for the Ag Reserve. And so what the developers are looking at doing is turning single family neighborhoods into the next greenfield. So they can tear down the houses. And if you look at what EYA builds in Montgomery County, they can replace the houses with 4-story townhouses with elevators. That's where this is going. Not going anywhere for you. It's going for somebody else. Something else is driving this, and this was a mistake. I'm not sure I've got a slide on this one, but in about 2018, the Council of Governments, they create these forecasts for growth in the region. Every county in the region does an estimate of how much growth they expect in jobs, population, and housing units. And they do it over a 30-year time frame, and they do it in 5-year increments. So in around 2015, they were in round 9. And round 9 went from 2015 to 2045. And they looked at the existing zoning, and they projected how much of the existing zoning, residential and commercial, would be built between 2015 and 2020, 2020 and 2025, 25 to 30, you get me? 5-year increments, how much of what zone would get built. And that's how we did our projections for growth. That's why if somebody tells you, say 30,000 people are coming here by 2030, that's actually derived from what Park and Planning said they think that you'll get enough jobs to trigger enough demand for 30,000 housing units. And just so you know, jobs drive demand for housing. People don't go to a place if there aren't available jobs for them. They go to cities that are growing. And you know, the reverse is true. When cities die and they start shedding jobs, they also lose population because people need to work. And so the projections that are done by the Council of Governments and by our own planning board showed that we have enough housing to house everybody who's coming here by 2050 now, because the new round is round 10. It goes from 2020 to 2050. But back in 2018, I keep saying 1918, none of us were alive then. In 2018, they noticed that the jobs number was higher than what they expected and that they hadn't proposed enough additional housing units. So what COG said, Council of Governments, said to the local jurisdictions is, we need to build 75,000 additional units by 2030 beyond our current projections, and 25,000 housing units more by 2050. Back then it was 2045. And that's beyond our existing projections. That's where they started on this. So that number was turned into a target. And these have never been targets before. These are just their estimate of who's going to come here based on the jobs they expected, and then the housing gets built. And so that's why we're sitting on 31,000 unbuilt units. They were approved and ready to go, and then the developers stalled and didn't build them because, like I said, the rents weren't high enough. So Montgomery County's number for 2030 was originally about 30,000 units. With the 10,000 units, we should have been at 40,000 new units by 2030, and we had all the zoning for it. And then it goes farther than that. Parking planning goes to a meeting with all the planning directors with the Council of Governments, and the Council of Government tells them that they've done a study and that none of the jurisdictions need to change any of their zoning to accommodate these additional housing units. They said that you have already zoned for enough housing units to accommodate the people who are coming here. Parking planning doesn't tell you that. They take the number and say you need 10,000 more units. They don't tell you that COG said you have the capacity to build them within your existing zoning. So now they're playing games with numbers, and they're not telling the public the truth about what they can and cannot do. And so there was no need for us to travel down this road. But they did something even more interesting. They broke this stuff down into prices. So this first slide shows you, this is the future of housing, Greater Washington. You need to add 75,000 units by 2030. Montgomery County was assigned 10,000 units. And then it says 75% of the new housing units should be in activity centers or near high capacity transit. None of the housing in the Affordable Housing Initiative is in an activity center or near public transit. None of it's near a metro station. None of it's at a purple line stop. It's primarily not there. And that's where Park and Planning said it should go. And they said 75% of the new housing should be affordable to low and middle income people. They go farther than that, and they actually break down, I'm trying to get to the right slide. They break down who these people are, and it's not on one of these slides. So I'll go back to this. Of the 75% that need housing in the low and moderate range, 38%, is it 38? 48% needed housing that was priced at where rents were $1,300 or less. You guys seen an apartment that's $1,300 or less? That's
Not
what was
mine.
supposed to be built. Units $1,300 or less. Thrive doesn't say anything about that. After that group, there was another group that needed housing at the price point between $1,300 and $2,500 a month. There's a little bit of the $2,500 stuff on the market, mostly one bedroom. In the very, very old buildings, which aren't new, you could find a 2-bedroom. But none of this is no, you're not going to get any 2 bedrooms out of the new housing that go for $2,500. And the only stuff that was market was the remaining housing units above those 2 numbers. So they were told that the housing targets had to be income driven. Park and Planning has no income driving in this attainable housing plan. They're going ahead with the number they say they need, but they're not dividing it up into the income groups that need to be served by it. So again, these, my favorite part about all this stuff is I use Park and Planning's numbers and I use their words because I can't make this stuff up. It's too good and make it really easy to play with them like this. This is the letter I talked about. It's dated October 17th, 2019. He said the result of our initial assessment confirmed that the region can accommodate within existing comprehensive plans and zoning significantly more housing than the 100,000 units called for in the board's directive. This is what we were told by the experts. This is not what Park and Planning is telling you. So we dug this out. We even dug out a slide from the meeting where COG and the board met. And then on the slide, it actually had the statement on a slide telling them you don't need to do any zoning. You already have this capacity to do this. So we have the zoning we need. We have the activity centers. We have 22 activity centers in Montgomery County. But the only thing we're not doing is we're not meeting the COG targets for who has to be housed. So you guys can draw your own conclusions about what they're up to. But I'm pretty clear about what I think they're up to. So fast forward to 2021 and round 10 is on us, round 10 forecast. And I have this chart up here. And in each of these things, the top number is the round 9.2 forecast. And the bottom number is the round 10 forecast. And I want to focus on 2030 because the number was, this actually was a little bit, was 2,000 units higher than this when they said that we needed 10,000 more units. 2 years after they said that, the number is not 138 or 140, it's 128. Then they revised the numbers again for the round 10 forecast, which is down here. I'm sorry, I was on the wrong one. Housing units were down here. It was 422 units. And in round 10, they dropped that number of units to 416. Not only don't they add 10,000 units, they actually reduce the number of units by, what is that? 5,800 units. So not only are they using the wrong number for the number of units they need, they're not telling you it's the wrong number. And as you can see, if you follow, HH means households. If you follow that chart all the way out, we don't get back to the number of units projected for Montgomery County until 2040. That's how long it takes to recover from this. And on jobs, they dropped the job forecast for Montgomery County in 2030 by 58.9 thousand jobs, 58,900 jobs. And if you have less jobs coming here, that means you have fewer housing units that are needed. And again, they're not telling you any of that either. So Park and Planning is basically doing a con job on the public and claiming this is about affordable housing, but nothing they're doing has anything to do with affordable housing. And so the person who posted that first slide obviously doesn't understand what's in the plan and what's going to get built here. And I'm really concerned about that. We do not need more neighborhoods where the wealthy go into one neighborhood and the people without money go into other neighborhoods. We just cannot afford to continue to do that. So next steps. This is in front of the council now. There are a lot of people upset about it. We're continuing to put out more information as we dig up stuff from the Council of Governments or from Park and planning, we put that information out publicly so people can see what we're dealing with. What we do need to do is support affordable housing, because that's something that's drying up between I don't know why I'm stuck in the 1900s. Between 2000 and 2020, the county went from about 40,000 naturally occurring housing units to about 22,000 naturally occurring housing units. Park and planning projected we would lose half of those by 2030, but because of the rapid rent escalation that occurred before they made that estimate, we'll be lucky if we have anything left by 2030.
Those are naturally occurring affordable housing units.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the stuff that, you didn't have to subsidize. People could just move into it. It was there. And we lost half of everything we had. And we don't make up for it by what we get from the developers. We build far fewer fewer MPDUs than we lose affordable units. And we lose affordable units either to the lack of good rent control, where we lost a ton of units, or because park and planning approves the knocking down of existing apartment buildings to build high rises. We had, I was showing the slide back during when they were talking about Thrive, and in Bethesda, in the plan for Bethesda, they proposed knocking down the 3-story red brick buildings on the edges of Bethesda. And they were approving projects where people would get triple the density that was on the existing apartment buildings, and they would provide fewer affordable units than existed in the buildings that were there today. Why do you do that? Unless you're intent on getting people out of a community. And it really, so we put that out there, and we were fortunate. HOC, Housing Opportunities Commission, actually stepped up and bought many of those 3-story apartment buildings and are going to preserve them. And when they do a change, they're going to move people to existing buildings and then build a new building and then put people back in those buildings. So if HOC does this, it's going to be done in the way that ensures that people who need the housing get the housing. The private sector was just going to knock the stuff down and build expensive housing. And again, that was from their plans. It's not me just saying it. We could pull out the plans and show you what they were planning to do and what park and planning was approving. And why you would why park and planning would target, these low-rise buildings with affordable rents for replacement, knowing they would not get affordable units back, is really distressing. But that's kind of what we're working with. We want to focus on affordable housing. My staff is working on something we're going to call complete communities, and it's going to require that park and planning zone, if they go into the activity centers, that zoning in the activity centers would have to provide at least 30% affordable housing. And it has to provide it in a wider range. They have to go down to 30% of AMI, as well as going up to about 80% of AMI. Because even people who don't qualify for MPDUs can't find affordable units in Bethesda. There are lots of young people making $1,800 who can't afford a $2,500 a month apartment building, not making $1,800, making $80,000. They can't afford that $2,500 one bedroom. So we need park and planning when they look at it at rezoning the densest places of the county. We need to make sure that when they rezone them, they rezone them so that the people who can move there represent everybody in the community and not a small portion of the community. And of course, park and planning is not a fan of this. So,
Mark, we've
I
got a
don't know what
couple
to tell you.
questions that may be helpful, and I see that you've got just cause eviction on there.
Yeah.
A couple of the concerns that we have. The Renters Alliance in general is more concerned about what happens to tenants when they get in their buildings and how secure they are, how predictable and reasonable their rents are, and of course not being evicted without a good reason. And of course, we thank you for your support of just cause eviction protections that we hope will get passed this Maryland General Assembly. But a basic question here, Mark, what is the relationship of the planning board to the county government Is there a check and balance? What is the accountability? How does that work?
There's zero accountability. The planning board is entirely appointed by the council. And then the council is not involved until the planning board sends a document over to the council. So there's no real oversight. And it's concerning. I vetoed one of the members of the planning board, and the council overrode my veto. But when somebody tells me that they're not interested in building affordable housing, is we just want to build all housing everywhere, and then the market will provide the affordable housing by lowering the rents on the older buildings, that tells me they actually have no intention of solving the problem. It would take a long time for rents to drop to the point that people making 50% of AMI can afford the units that are on the market today. So it's a problem, and I think I wouldn't appoint people like that to the planning board. If it was me, I would want people who actually are sensitive to the need to provide housing for everybody.
So there's a structural problem that the public needs to be aware of, and perhaps something that can be fixed down the road. I want to also underscore a point that was made in the chat, that affordable housing is not just a poor person's issue, that there are a whole bunch of us who are making a little bit of money, but we're looking at our housing costs going up beyond what we're making, even in the middle class and even in the upper middle class, especially for people on fixed incomes, senior retirees who may have made a good deal of money and have moved lock, stock, and barrel into a nice apartment, but seeing the costs of their housing going beyond their reach. And now they're facing their 70s and their 80s, and they don't know where they're going to go. Do we have other questions for the county executive, folks?
I can answer some of the ones I see right away. Somebody asked about HOC to provide housing for people. HOC, they don't have enough money to build a lot of housing. And what they do is either acquire existing units and rehab them, or in some cases not rehab them, which is a problem we're trying to work on now. And they do build some stuff, but they don't nearly build at quantity. And if you're lucky in an HOC, you get 30% affordable, 70% market. I'm hoping, I've appointed new people to the board. I'm hoping there's a greater focus on a higher percentage. HOCs funded some really big deals and wound up with not control over the project. I feel if HOC is the primary source of funds on a project, then HOC should dictate the mix of the projects and get higher degree of affordability. And I agree with the comment about providing housing across a wider range. That's why we're looking at 80% of AMI. 80% of AMI would get you close to $100,000. So that kind of captures the range of people that we know anecdotally are having a hard time. Even a person making $100,000, if they spend 30% of their income on housing, then it's only $2,500 a month. If you want to get really upset, where they built the apartments at Strathmore, the Strathmore Metro. So supposedly the county's getting affordable units there at some point. We're not getting them out of the first round, but the county gave up the taxes on that building to supposedly get affordable housing. And Mr. Friedson and others are at this ribbon cutting for the opening of the building. You're going to love this. 3 bedrooms we're renting for $10,000. 2 bedrooms are $7,000. 1 bedrooms are $4,000. The studios are $2,800. And that's what taxpayer money went to subsidize. I'm blown away by that. That's not what we should be doing with our dollars. If we're subsidizing things like the project up off of Randolph Road, where 100% of the units are going to be affordable, or what Montgomery Housing Partnership announced in Bethesda, which was I think it was 163 units, all in the affordable range. So we're looking to do that kind of stuff, and if we're putting money into deals, that's the things we expect to get is a wider range of affordability, and to try to deal with this crisis that people are dealing with. If you're a young person trying to come to work in Montgomery County, you are SOL. You know, if you're particularly if you're single. I just went through before I was here. I was at a presentation about teachers and the school budget, which is going to be very large. But you know, starting pay for a teacher is $63,000. Where the hell is this person going to live in the county? They might as well just say, if you want to be a teacher in Montgomery County, you have to be partnered because you're not going to make it here on one income. So,
Mark, County Executive Alwards, can you address, we deal with this narrative all the time. The Renters Alliance does not oppose building new housing. We just are concerned that the narrative of building more housing is not a substitute for renter protections, but actually just another policy. But the idea that we could build our way out of the housing crisis, that somehow rent prices for the existing population will come down, that we can build enough in a certain time frame in order for that to happen, that the landlord developer industry will flood the market with apartments so that competition is high and then the rents will come down. Is any of that realistic, or is that a mirage?
that is absolute lie. And it goes against what every economist tells you. If you read articles about housing supply in any region, it includes the DC metro area, they talk about how landlords meter the new construction, so that they're not building into a situation where there's high levels of vacancies. So in Bethesda, there's been a slowdown in some of the projects because they have high levels of vacancy. So you don't build until most of the vacancy is absorbed. When most of the vacancy is absorbed, you build because if you think there's demand to be in a desirable area, you know that you can now meet that demand by building your building. But if you own multiple properties, why the hell would you overbuild and create excess supply that drives down your rent on your other buildings? Nobody does that in the real world. People might make it up, but nobody does that in the real world. So that's not going to happen.
And I guess that also goes to the point that whatever they are building are not exactly affordable.
Yep. And that's what you could read the White Flint report where they interview the developers, and the interviews and developers tell them they can't find the tenants with the rent. And one of the problems, and zoning is part of this, if you zone land for high rise, the price of land goes up. So if the county zoned stuff for like 7-story buildings where you can build in stick, which means wood construction or metal studs and not concrete and steel, you can build more affordable units more easily. The county can subsidize those units much more easily if they're built in stick. If you build high rises, the price per square foot goes up, and actually the taller you get, it gets worse because the building has to be stronger to support the additional weight that you put on top. The footers underneath the building have to be bigger to hold the additional weight. So taller buildings aren't necessarily cheaper per square foot, even though you might get a lot more square feet. So if a developer buys a piece of land that has been rezoned for high rise, they pay a premium price for the land based on the fact that they have the authority or they're allowed to build the high rise building. If a developer decides they don't want to build that high rise building, they've actually paid more per unit that they're going to get than they would pay if they had built the high rise unit. Just think of the land price divided over 200 units versus 100 units. If you're going to want the same price, you're going to hope you get the same price for the land that you paid for it. If it yields fewer units than what you thought you were going to get, that buyer is going to wind up not paying what you paid for the land. So the obsession with high rise is actually undermining the ability to build affordable housing. It's like with the guy who came to us. If Park and Planning had said, we're not going to approve you if you don't build the high rise, we would have lost, almost 1,000 units of reasonably affordable housing. But he's willing to take a hit and build fewer units. Not everybody's willing to do that. Actually, he took the hit because he's a long-term landowner. The landowners who own land when it got rezoned, they're kind of agnostic on this, because if you bought If you bought it when it was like a one-story building or a shopping center with, maybe offices above it for a story, that land came to you really, really cheaply. So when the county rezones your land, it makes it worth a fortune, but you haven't put any more money into it. So you might have a 20-story potential height, but if there's not a demand for it, you can also build a 7-story building, and you're not bearing the land costs that come with the 20-story building. But if you're buying the land from somebody who owns it cheap, and you were going to realize the density, they're going to make you pay the higher price. It's
So,
just basic economics.
which is all I ever took in college. So county executive, summing up, since we have another few minutes or so, obviously the question is, well, what's the alternative if this attainable housing plan is not doing what it purports to do? Have you considered, another question in the chat came up about alternative types of housing, social housing? What are your prescriptions for addressing the unaffordability and the lack of housing choice in Montgomery County?
So, but nobody in this community, if people were demanding triplexes and quads, developers would have been building a long time ago and would have asked for rezoning. They've never done that. They're perfectly happy to do townhouses and single-family homes where they can. Also, because of the zoning we've already got in place, there is no need to rezone anything to house people. In other words, we will, of our normal course of things, absent what park and planning is doing, places will develop more than are developed now. There are parts of Montgomery County, obviously Down County got developed faster, but there are places in Wheaton and in Glenmont, and as you go up Rockville Pike, places where there are opportunities to develop. That's why the county has capacity for over 100,000 housing units. It's not an accident that the COG said you can hold more than the 100,000 units extra that you're all going to have to hold, because they're looking at the numbers of what we zoned for, and they know, like I do, that there's no need to do the zoning to get the yield of the housing. Now, what I would do differently, I would ask park and planning to look at all the approvals that aren't being built, and particularly focus on the high rises. And I'd suggest rezoning the high rise areas back down to 7 to 10 stories, something you can do with stick, if you can get up to 10 in a stick, so that the units are affordable. They start out more affordable, and if the government has to pay a subsidy, me subsidizing something that costs $250 a square foot is a lot different than the county subsidizing something that costs $600 a square foot to build. So it would put us in a situation to be more active. We've put a substantial amount of money into housing, and we've done some projects on our own. I'm interested in looking at buying a couple of the office parks, which I wish park and planning was focused on, but buying a couple of the office parks that are out there, or finding a developer to partner with. And we would actually build townhouses and low-rise apartment buildings there that would meet the affordability needs of people in the county. And I'm not talking about just low income. You can build some pretty nice apartment buildings at a price point of under $2,000. It can be done if you're not going up in high rise. So I'd like the county to play more in that space. We've had discussions about being able to use our pension funds to invest in affordable housing, because we invest in all kinds of shit. We invest in petroleum and all kinds of other things to get a return. And housing is one of the most secure returns you can get. So if the county were to play a more active role in construction or partnering with somebody, we could use our pension funds to help get us there. But that means convincing the pension board to agree to do housing. And that means bringing in people like Calvert and other the funds that are doing housing to show them that this is not risky. I cannot think of a safer investment than building an apartment building, frankly. People would not be doing this if it weren't, other than the price of the land, they wouldn't be in it if it weren't a pretty safe investment. So I feel, those are the things we can do. And in doing that, social housing means different things I think, to different people. It is not simply, as Hans would say, it's economically mixed. That is not social housing. Social housing is either owned by a, an organization that owns the housing for the purpose of providing affordable housing to people. Um, you don't usually build equity, which is an issue for some people. But also, like if in the European model, where they've got where the social housing corporation has housing in different cities, or even multiple buildings in the same city, you can go from your social housing unit in one building to a social housing unit in another building. So you could still have mobility and upward mobility if you need a larger apartment, but you would lose out on the appreciation of the units. And we could do a more townhouse development with caps on appreciation so that they remain affordable, but people still get some equity. But the moment you let it all go to pure equity play where anybody can get as much as they want, all you do is change the gentrifier from the developer to the first generation of people who buy these units. And if we do that, it's going to be really hard to maintain a supply of affordable housing if people can just cash out and sell their units at market after the county helped invest so we could sell them to people below market. So those are things that, we're interested in doing. You can already see, you can see some of the stuff we've done, like in Emery Grove, the county's involved in a project that's going to build 500 affordable units. This project in Pike and Rose will build 500 affordable units. So we're playing at scale now, and we can keep doing this. We just have to keep the supply of money coming into the county. But I'm excited about what I think the prospects are, as long as the council continues to agree to let us put more money into housing.
I think we better hurry because the funds available to put money into new housing may be in jeopardy down the road. We have quite stormy seas coming in the next months and years ahead. Mr. County Executive, there's so much more to discuss in this area. This has been recorded and will be on YouTube for anybody who wants to review it. Mark, do you have go ahead.
I think, I'm looking at some of the comments. People should really, really look at the master plans. Somebody's commenting about, we have this, I'm saying we have the zoning in the county. Why did the housing cost as much as it does? We've got the zoning, but if I've zoned for high rises, it costs as much as it does because people are building high rises. The stuff that's not being built, that's waiting to get built, there's a whole lot of townhouses out there in the county's plans. And if you went through, you could pull up all the master plans and look at what, the planned neighborhoods, what's planned for the neighborhoods, and get a sense of what else is out there. And like I said, if I had my way, I would look at the housing that's not being built. I'd reduce the density so it could be built, and so that there was a market for it, and we'd be able to build housing more affordably. But as long as the land's zoned for high rise, you can forget it, unless the government gets amazingly rich.
There was a question about the right of first refusal. That will be a topic of a future town hall for us. We will invite the housing director, Scott Bruton, and any others who have expertise in this area to talk about the direction the county is taking on this subject. It is a complicated subject, just as building more housing can be complicated and these plans can be complicated. We do appreciate the expertise and knowledge of the county executive on this subject. Again, this has been recorded. It's on YouTube. If you have any questions that follow this conversation, you can send them to us at info@rentersalliance.org. Obviously, this is not the be-all and end-all of the conversation, but we are particularly grateful for the county executive for giving us all this time this evening and giving his opinion on this attainable housing plan and quote of the Park and Planning Department. And we look forward to a continued conversation. Mark, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. We have 10 minutes left, and I want to give David Mullins, our outreach director, and Emily Towie a few minutes to tell everybody what resources are out there if you need them.
Yeah, I could start because we started out the night talking about state legislation and I think something that did get through and then later got through the funding was the Access to Counsel and Evictions or ACE program that provides lawyers for tenants who are facing eviction. The statistics are pretty much all landlords are represented. The vast majority of tenants are not. So this sought to right that a little bit. So they have same day representation down at the courts on the failure to pay rent days. And the organizations that are covering this are CASA and Maryland Legal Aid. If you can, though, it's good to reach out ahead of time. So I'm going to put their numbers in the chat, their intake numbers, as far in advance as you can. If you have court, reach out. But then also, please know if there's something that they don't cover, since that's only eviction prevention. If you have questions about rent escrow, other things, you can still try those organizations. But then also, you can just go down to the second floor of the district court. There in Rockville, they have a self-help center where you can walk in and try to speak to an attorney for a consultation there. So I'll put those numbers in the chat now.
Thanks. Emily, Code and Ulta?
Yeah, so for folks who are having different kinds of issues in their rental housing, if you're having maintenance problems, broken appliances, pests, things of that nature that have to do with the condition of the unit. First you should try to talk to your property manager, whether that be putting in a request into your online portal with the maintenance team or going down and speaking to the office. You need to try to give them a reasonable amount of time to address the issue and reasonable changes depending if your toilet is flooding, and then a quick response is warranted. Maybe if a light bulb is out, maybe you can give them a couple extra days. So you use your judgment on that, or you can talk to us. We can tell you what we think is reasonable given the situation. But after you talk to property manager, give them a chance to address it. Let's say 3 weeks have gone by, or they said, we're not going to fix that, either unwilling, unable, something of that nature, and the issue is still persisting. You can file a complaint with Montgomery County's code enforcement. You can do that by calling 311 and asking to speak to code, or you can file a complaint online, and I'll put that link in the chat in just a second. Similarly, for other kinds of complaint, would be landlord tenant complaints, and those go to the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, or we say ULTA. So these are complaints not about bugs or appliances or things like that. It's going to be what it sounds like, landlord tenant issues. So if you're having a ledger discrepancy, if you paid your rent on time but you're seeing a late fee on the ledger, if you're having a disagreement with the landlord about something in your lease, something like that, you can go ahead and send to ULTA. Same situation, you can call 311 or you can use the online form, which David has put in the chat. And then there's a third office, a new office, which the county executive mentioned earlier with the new rent stabilization law. There's the Office of Rent Stabilization. So if and this is a little bit complicated, but if you received an excessive if you believe that your building's rent stabilized, and you were expecting a rent increase to be 6% or lower and you get 10%, you can send that to the Office of Rent Stabilization. They also will be handling fees now because the new rent stabilization law covers fees. So certain fees, and I won't get into all of it right now because we don't have enough time, but we do have a town hall on our YouTube where we discuss some of this. And you can also email us with more questions. But the rent stabilization office is going to cover certain junk fees that have to be eliminated, and there's going to be a cap on certain fees, like how much they can charge fees. So fees and rent increases to rent stabilization, landlord tenant issues with like your lease, your ledger, issue with the property manager, that's ULTA, and bugs, appliances, condition of your unit, that is to code enforcement. And if you get confused or you don't remember this, you can always just send us a message and we'll tell you who you should direct your complaint to. But for all of them, you should try to resolve it first by speaking with the property manager.
Right, and we're also here to help you navigate any of these issues. If you're not sure, get in touch with us first. We can counsel you. We've been doing this for a long time. We're not lawyers, but we do play them on TV and we often work with lawyers. So we have some idea of how to assess the issues that you might have and point you in the right direction or guide you to the available resources. David?
Yeah, speaking of the lawyers, there was a comment I wanted to respond to. Someone mentioned that they were at the court and that they're not down there for same day representation. And I want to just lift that up and say, yeah, we've actually noticed down at the court as well that the coverage doesn't seem to be there fully covered. There's multiple dockets of failure to pay rent, both morning and afternoon. And yes, we've noticed that they may not all be covered. And even if there is an attorney there, they're not allowed to walk up to you, but you have to walk up to them. Sometimes you miss them. So again, please, yeah, either you can actually call 211. That's now an ask for a housing attorney, or you can call them directly. Again, Maryland Legal Aid and CASA. But thank you for commenting.
Great. And Malek, what is our 888 number?
Unmute. So I put it in the chat.
There it is.
668-7717. You can leave a message.
Right. Please, we have English and Spanish translation if you need it, and staff who are fluent in that. And some of us also speak Sesotho. If you need translation in Sesotho, that would be me. And whoever the one person is in Montgomery County who needs that, hopefully you're not having problems with your rental housing. We also have people who speak some French, and we can get pretty much any language translated if need be. So don't hesitate to call us on the 888 number on any issue having to do with renters' rights. Forming a tenants association, we urge every apartment community in Montgomery County and beyond to have a tenants association in your building. We can help you with that. We can do door-to-door literature drops and invitations to meetings. We can help you structure a tenants association in any form that you want, from very serious to just a group getting together who cares about their community. But that's what we're here to do. That's what we're here to help. If you're having issues getting services that you're entitled to, either in county government or with one of our partner nonprofits, we're also here to work with you and advocate for you to make sure that you get the services that you're entitled to and your rights enforced. And Pat, you always have a final message for us as the election is over, but there's always another one coming down the road.
Absolutely. And you can see from just this meeting tonight how important it is for you to find out who is on your side. I mean, we just missed Just Cause. So find out who in your neighborhood, who represents you and what their philosophies are. We need everybody to vote. It's just what we have to work with. I mean, it's important. So find out who represents your well-being and try to vote them in office or vote them out of office.
Yes, there was a time when they said renters didn't vote, didn't pay taxes, and were not permanent residents, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Bingo.
We're nearly 40% of Montgomery County, nearly 40% of the state. We have increasing influence, and of course, we want to make sure that we keep and increase that influence to put in people in elected office who support affordable, quality housing for all of us. So I want to thank our panel. I want to, of course, thank County Executive Mark Elrich for his years of understanding of this issue in detail. And if you see Brian Piat or Max Wilberg in your buildings, they're with the Renters Alliance, and they're helping get information out door to door to tenants across the county. So we thank them for being with us this year. I thank all of our panel, and with